This morning's reading is particularly apt to my life, and probably to everyone's life out there. We all have our own narratives. But when I saw this, I was immediately taken back to my childhood. Because yes, the truth is one, but the paths are many. And that's really a caution against us being critical of anybody who is not on this path. And I certainly didn't start out on this path. But I thought that my path was pretty good. I grew up in San Francisco. And I was in a Catholic family, a very devout Catholic family. And we practiced our religion assiduously. We lived on a hill in a neighborhood. It was called the St. Agnes Parish. They didn't call them neighborhoods. And St. Agnes Parish was in the Haight-Ashbury. So that's long gone. Now it's the Haight-Ashbury. But all the people, all the families on my hill were Catholic families. Most of them were Irish Catholic families. There were the Bradys of Tom Brady. His father lived there. There were the Carters. There were the McGuires. There were the Yorks. And there were the Purcells. And there were the outliers who were Catholic, but they were El Salvadoran and Native American who lived next door. But we accepted them. They were Catholic. And we all went to the same school, St. Agnes. And the nuns taught us about our religion. And on Sundays, we all went down to the church, St. Agnes Church, and we prayed the same prayers, and we were together. All of the celebrations were the same. We all made our first Holy Communion. We had confirmation, the whole thing. And it was really good. I felt so safe and so secure because everywhere I looked, I saw reflections of me in this little puddle of a family, and then rippling out into the neighborhood, into the school, into the church. And there was a tremendous amount of support in that kind of homogeneous experience. And then, of course, there were the ripples, the cross currents. And at one point, a Chinese family wanted to move into the neighborhood. And the neighbors came to my father, and they were soliciting his help to prevent this Chinese family from moving into this Irish Catholic neighborhood. And he said, well, I'll help, but I'm going to help them. And rebuffed, they went away. And the Chinese family did indeed move into our neighborhood, and happily so. And then a little time went on, and an African-American family moved in up the street. And the neighbors came to my father again, and they said, surely you draw the line here. And he said, not at all. He said, I'm going to help them move in. I'm going to go down them and help them sign the deed. And they were rebuffed and went away. So I had that model working for me of inclusiveness, of generosity, of spirit, of non-dogmatism. And then I had the other model. Now, my father and my mother were an interesting couple. He was from the Irish. She was from the Lebanese. And they had both of their heritages had the experience of struggling with persecution. The Irish, of course, being persecuted by the English Protestants, and the Lebanese being persecuted by the Muslims. And those traditions came down through the family. And so there was this sense of, we're a group of people who have experienced prejudice. And now we're strong. We're together. We live in a neighborhood. We live in a city. We live in a country that allows us freedom. And yet there were cross currents. It's always anomalies. I remember my father telling the story, and he told this in a happy frame of mind. But he was an avid reader, and he read anything and everything. And he came home one day to find out that my mother had burnt Mark Twain's The Mysterious Stranger in the fireplace, because that book was on the condemned list of books that the church had put out. My mother was chapter verse Catholic, and my father was a bit iconoclastic. And so I had all of those models working for me. My mother, one day we were in the city in the car, and we're coming up the hill towards Nob Hill, and as we crested the hill, there was this huge, beautiful cathedral, Grace Cathedral. And I'm in the back of the car, I'm just a little kid, and I said, "Oh, that's beautiful, let's go in and make a visit." And that's what we did. We visited churches and we prayed. And my mother said, "Oh, no, that's Protestant." And the conversation didn't go on from there, but over and over again, I got the message that the Catholic Church was the one true universal apostolic church. And then when my mother died, now I have to say something about my mother. Despite the fact that she was by the book, she had the most expansive heart in the world. She loved people and they loved her back instantly. Babies were calm with her. People who were getting divorces could laugh with her. It just didn't matter. She was that unique kind of a person. And so ultimately, even her own children challenged her dogmatism. And her response was to expand, expand, expand. So I'll tell you one little story that happened that I think demonstrates this. When she died, we were going through all of her things, and we came upon a letter written by a neighbor. Her name was Miss Barry. Miss Barry was an unmarried woman who had lived with her brother, Demetrius. They were, I think, Greek, down at the bottom of the hill. And she had befriended my youngest sister, Patricia. And Patricia, being the youngest of 9, that's a hard role. So you need special friends. And Miss Patricia would go down there and they would talk about everything. And I think she brought light into Miss Barry's life, and I think Miss Barry was a refuge for her. So here's this letter. Dear Mrs. Purcell, I know you would want to know that Patricia and I had a conversation not too long ago in which she told me that she thought that maybe she should die young because if she lived long, she was in danger of committing a mortal sin. And that meant that she would spend eternity damned to hell. And she said, I know, Miss Barry was the consummate diplomat. I know you would want to know this so that you could do something to make it right. Now, my mother never told us about this, and I know that she did make it right with Patricia, but it explained why that Christmas Eve dinner, Miss Barry was the guest of honor. And that's the way my mother worked. But that kind of dogmatism, eternal damnation, hellfire, it kind of went over my head. I never really thought that I was going to be damned for eternity. I somehow thought that I was going to move through it and maybe spend a few times in purgatory, but I would eventually get to heaven. So you have that dogmatism that took a universal truth and in an attempt to understand it and to incorporate it into one's life, it became cemented and it lost the elasticity that human nature absolutely requires. I remember visiting Swamiji in India, and I've told this story before, but I think it's pertinent. It was just as he was finishing up, he was redoing the manuscript for Revelations of Christ. And what he was doing in that book was countering the dogmatism that had taken the Catholic Church away from original Christianity into other permutations of dogma. And he was a little bit, I would not say irritated, because he really didn't get irritated, but I was trying to read the manuscript every morning when we went to see him as he left it on the table, and somebody would always interrupt me and say, Helen, would you please come and help me with breakfast? Would you please help us wrap the Christmas present? And I was not making inroads. And he said to me, how far did you get? And I said, I'm on page 15, and it was like the third day. And he didn't say anything, but I knew he wasn't pleased. And so finally, I just said no to everybody, and I sat and I read this manuscript. And when I came to the part where he's talking about mortal sin, because what he was doing in this book was reframing what had become dogmatic, not dogma. There's a difference. And he said, how can a finite act have an infinite effect? And I read that book, and bells went off, the orchestra played. It was just the most simple, insightful response to the misinterpretation of what had become dogmatic in the Catholic Church, and which my sister was responding to as just this little tiny tyke. And I realized yet again the clarity that has been Swamiji's gift to us as we move along this path. But that said, there are many paths, and many paths worthy of the same respect that we give our own. It's just that they're somebody else's. They're not ours. And they're perfect for that other person in that time of their evolution as a soul. And this is perfect for us in our evolution as a soul. I do remember when I first came to Ananda, and I came the same day, September 12th, that Swamiji came to Master. And I always held that close in my heart as kind of a wonderful incidental occurrence. But maybe there are no accidents. I don't know. Anyway, so I came, and when I was first at Ananda, what struck me the most was, number one, that Jesus Christ was in the lineage, and I felt my whole body relax because I loved Jesus, and I would never give him up. But secondly, was the joy that permeated the air, that permeated me, my whole body. The joy of finding the right fit, like a shoe. It was right for me. And so I just immersed myself to the degree that I could, the nth degree. I embraced it all. And I took it home to my family. And my mother, yet again, was challenged to expand the walls of what she thought was appropriate. And to her credit, she did. I admit my father was a little bit cynical. My brothers went out and researched Swami Kriyananda to be sure I hadn't joined a cult. And they came back and they said, no, he's the real thing. He's very much respected. And I was actually rather proud that they did that. I didn't know they were going to do that. And so my family accepted it. But they never came along with me. I would have loved it if they had come along with me. But that's what this reading is all about. It's not their path. It's our path. And to that end, we have to be respectful of everybody. In our school, we have children who come from many, many different paths. I got a call from the devotee in Italy who is trying to start up a new Living Wisdom school. And she said, Helen, what is the difference between a Living Wisdom school and an Education for Life school? I'm very confused. And I thought, that's exactly what we're talking about today. So I said to her, a Living Wisdom school is a school that is in the lineage of Ananda. And it is a school that looks to Swami Kriyananda and Yogananda as the founders and the inspiration for everything that we do in that school. I said, but Swamiji never wanted Education for Life to be limited to Ananda. That's just way too narrow. And yet not everybody who wants to teach or to be in a school that is what Living Wisdom is, they can't be on our path. So, because it's not their dharma. So Swamiji made the distinction. An Education for Life school has the same kinds of values that it imparts to the children, that it's very, very expansive. The teachings are embedded in the school, but it is not dogmatic. And it doesn't offer it up as an Ananda entity. And so she was actually relieved, because that school in Italy is going to be starting up in a little town between Perugia and Assisi, and none of those people who are going to bring their children to that school are on the Ananda path. And yet they recognize the value, the preciousness of what is offered. So that's it in the grand scheme. Now, this reading is also about those of us who have joined together as disciples of Yogananda and as friends and followers of Swami Kriyananda. Because it's just the narrower view of trying not to be dogmatic, of trying not to impose what it is, who it is that we are on others, if it's not theirs to take. And it's so easy sometimes to feel superior. I know as a child, I certainly felt that I had a corner of truth that, say, those other kids didn't have. I did. And there was a kind of inherent pride in that. But on our path, there are very many mini paths. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But look at it this way. Once Swami was giving a talk, and he used the metaphor of a tennis game. And he said, in America, it's so easy to know what the boundaries are. You know, you have the lines on the side, you have the line in the middle, and the net. And he said, and the net never changes. It always stays in the same place. So he had me with him up until that point. And then he says, but in India, he said, the net moves, and they still play the game. And I thought, what does that mean? I was truly puzzled by that. I could not square it with anything that was in my experience. And so I did what I have come to do when I don't understand something that comes from somebody who has a much higher level of understanding than I. I put it on a shelf. And over the years, I came to an appreciation of what that means, just observing how Swami interacted with all of us. It was completely individual. Everyone had a different lesson plan, so the net moved. And you might expect one person to lob the ball over and make it across the net if it were in one place, but another person couldn't do that. So you move it a little closer, and they get it over, and they experience success. And then they go on the next step instead of being stymied. And I thought, that is such an amazing way to approach things. And then I realized I do it all the time. I'm a teacher. And you have these children in front of you, and they're all different. You know, have the know-it-all who thinks he really has command of the subject matter, but he needs a little humility. And then you have the really excellent student who doesn't think she knows anything, and she needs to be bolstered. And you have the student who learns because they hear it, or the student who learns because they draw it, or whatever it is. They all have to have individual lesson plans, and we're no different. God has created an individual lesson plan for every single one of us. And so comparisons become odious. So to start judging people on the basis of their deviation from a norm just isn't true. In Out of the Labyrinth, Swami talks about what he termed, what's the term? You have a trajectory. Everybody's on their own trajectory. I have it down here. What's the term? Sorry? Yes, thank you. Directional relativity. And when he sent me out with somebody else one time to give a talk on Out of the Labyrinth, to have talks in bookstores all over California. And so I read that book, and I read that book, and I read that book. And I think the one thing that I got out of that book was directional relativity. The one thing that helped me to accept sometimes my own foibles and failings, to accept those in others as well, to be a better teacher, to be a better devotee, disciple, was directional relativity. Because what it means is that we are all on a trajectory, and it's our own, it's nobody else's. And so you have an incline, and you're moving up on the path. And you know the goal, it's self-realization. But how to get there? So we move along, and I'm sure you've experienced this, I know I have. There have been times when I have thought to myself, Helen, you're really making some progress here. And then there have been other times when I think to myself, wow, what happened? You took 2 steps back, whatever it is, an uncharitable thought, a misjudgment, a giving in to something that I shouldn't have given in to, whatever it is. And yet, as I look back over the last 34 years on this path, the trajectory has always been up. And when you can look at that yourself, first of all, it gives you compassion for yourself, and I think we all need that, because we all come across tough times. But also, it gives you a sense of the rhythm of this path. There are going to be spurts, and there are going to be fallbacks. There are going to be times where you plateau, and then there are going to be times when you jump ahead. Something happens, and it all feels right. And so that directional relativity. Now, time is also one of the elements. And I can remember Swami saying, we're all destined to melt back into the infinite. We are going to be self-realized. It's only a question of how long it's going to take. And then he would say, so why not now? Let's put out the energy. Let's do whatever it takes. Why not now? And it's with that thought that sometimes when I feel stalled, I dig really deep down and offer it to God and say, you've got to help me. And I know in my heart of hearts that the promise is true. Master walks this path with us. He's with us every step of the way. If we don't feel his presence, if we don't know that in the depths of our hearts, it's because we have blocked him out. It's not coming from the other direction. And so there's a solution. It's within our control. It's within our power. We just need to put out more energy. I'm always amused at how people interpret putting out more energy. It's different for everybody. I mean, some people need to serve, serve, serve. Some people need to give, give, give. Some people need to retreat and move into more of a seclusive frame of mind. It's just different. So ultimately, though, what is the same is the goal. And I came across this from Ramakrishna as I was reading about some of the things that I was thinking about for this sermon, and I thought I would share it with you. It's just so beautiful. He says about the goal, he says, the bird, the hummingbird, makes so much noise when it's searching for the nectar outside of the flower. But once it gets into the flower, then all is silent as it sips the nectar of bliss. And that's our destiny.